Have you ever taken your RV out into the woods, far from the noise of the city, hoping for peace and quiet, only to realize that silence can be the scariest thing of all? Tonight, we'll dive into terrifying real-life experiences from people who dared to spend the night in their RVs deep in the wilderness. Some of them came back shaken. Some swore they would never camp again. And some never came back at all. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching this video from? And what time is it right now? And if you've ever gone camping in an RV, would you dare to stay out in the woods after hearing these stories? Now, let's get into our first tale. Mark and Jenna had been on the road for almost 3 weeks. Their RV wasn't new, but it was their pride. Cozy, reliable, and just big enough for the two of them. They loved the freedom of parking anywhere, of falling asleep under the stars with nothing but thin walls between them and the wild. On a chilly October afternoon, they drove deep into the mountains of Colorado. The air was thinner there, the trees taller, and the roads lonelier. When they finally found a clearing surrounded by pines, Mark grinned and said, "This is it. No neighbors, no noise, just us." The campground was empty, no other vehicles, no rangers, just a faded wooden sign that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Jenna hesitated for a moment, staring at the trees. Something about the silence pressed against her ears, but she didn't want to ruin the moment, so she smiled and agreed. That evening, they built a small fire outside the RV. The flames crackled against the darkness, and their laughter echoed faintly into the woods. They roasted marshmallows, told old stories, and let the cold night wrap around them. By 11, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. The forest around them was quiet, too quiet. They packed up, locked the RV, and slipped into bed, the sound of the wind rocking the vehicle just enough to lull them to sleep. Hours later, Jenna opened her eyes. Something had woken her, though she wasn't sure what. The RV was dark, except for the faint green glow of the clock on the wall. It read 2:17 a.m. At first, she thought it might have been a dream. She lay still, listening, and then it came. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps on the RV door. Jenna's breath caught in her throat. She turned her head toward Mark, who was still asleep, his chest rising and falling in the faint light. She wanted to shake him awake, but her hand froze halfway. The knocks came again, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Her heart pounded. No one should have been out there. They hadn't seen a single person for miles. Finally, she whispered, "Mark, wake up." His eyes opened instantly, as though some part of him already knew something was wrong. And then, the knocking stopped. But the silence that followed was even worse. Mark sat up, straining his ears. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, just when Jenna thought maybe it was over, the sound returned. But this time, it wasn't knocking. It was the faint scrape of fingernails, dragging slowly down the side of the RV. Jenna clutched Mark's arm, her nails digging into his skin. He pulled free, grabbed the flashlight from the shelf, and tiptoed toward the small window by the door. "Don't," Jenna whispered sharply, but it was too late. He pulled the curtain aside and flicked on the light. Nothing. The beam lit up the clearing outside. The trees stood motionless, their branches swaying gently in the wind. The fire pit still smoked faintly. No footprints, no shadows, no one. And then the scraping stopped. For a moment, relief washed over them. Maybe it was just branches brushing against the metal siding. Maybe their minds were playing tricks, but then Jenna remembered something. "The trees," she whispered. "They're too far away." "Nothing's touching the RV." Mark's stomach sank. Trying to calm themselves, they checked the security camera mounted just above the door. The tiny monitor flickered to life, showing the grainy black and white feed of the steps leading up into the RV. At first, there was nothing, just the empty clearing, the faint glow of their dying fire. And then, movement. A figure stepped into view, tall, thin. Its limbs looked too long, its face pale and blurred by the low resolution. It just stood there at the foot of the steps, perfectly still, staring up at the door. The timestamp in the corner read 2:17 a.m. Jenna's voice cracked. That's when we heard the knocking. But as they watched in horror, the feed suddenly glitched. Static tore across the screen, then went black. Mark hit the side of the monitor, but the image didn't return. They were left in silence again, the weight of the darkness pressing against the thin RV walls. And then, from outside, knock, knock, knock. This time, it came from the window. The sound of knuckles against glass made Jenna scream before she could stop herself. Mark lunged forward, pulling the curtains shut as if fabric alone could shield them from whatever stood outside. "Stay down," he hissed. They crouched together on the RV floor, their hearts racing. The silence after the knock was suffocating, like the world was holding its breath. Mark whispered, "I'm calling the Rangers." He fumbled for his phone, but there was no signal. The screen mocked him with the words "no service." And then, the scratching started again. Slow, deliberate. This time it traced the outline of the window, as if something was drawing a shape in the condensation. Jenna couldn't stop herself. She peeked through a tiny gap in the curtain. Her stomach flipped. A pale face was pressed against the glass. Eyes wide, unblinking. The skin looked stretched too tight, the mouth slightly open as if frozen mid-breath. Jenna jerked back, stifling a sob. "Mark, it's right there!" Before he could look, the entire RV shook violently, as though someone had slammed their weight against the side. The dishes rattled in the cabinets. Something metallic clanged beneath the floor. Mark grabbed the closest thing he could use as a weapon, an old camping hatchet, and stood between Jenna and the door. Another slam rocked the RV, this time from the back. Then another on the roof. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving across the metal above them. Step, step, step. They held their breath, listening. And then, silence again. For a few terrifying moments they thought maybe it was over. But then the security monitor flickered back to life on its own. The figure was there again, this time closer to the camera, its face filling the screen. The pale, stretched skin, the hollow eyes staring directly into the lens, as though it knew they were watching. And then, in the bottom corner of the screen, a new timestamp appeared. 2:18 a.m. The footage was live. The monitor buzzed with static, then cleared again. The figure hadn't moved. It still stared into the lens, its head tilting slightly, almost curious. Then, slowly, it raised one hand. Long, pale fingers extended, tapping once against the camera lens. Tap. The screen went black. Mark tightened his grip on the hatchet. "We can't just sit here," he whispered. "We've got to leave. Now." Jenna shook her head violently. "If we go outside," but before she could finish, the RV shook again, harder this time. Whatever was outside, it was circling them, slamming into the walls as if testing the strength of the thin metal shell. Mark bolted into the driver's seat, turning the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. He tried again. Nothing. The air inside the RV grew heavy, suffocating. Jenna swore she heard breathing, ragged, labored, coming from every direction at once. Then, from the roof, a new sound, crawling. Something dragging itself across the metal, scraping with nails or claws, inching toward the windshield. Mark shouted, "Hold on!" He twisted the key one more time. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the trees. And that's when they saw it. The figure dropped down from the roof, landing in the beam of light. It was impossibly tall, its limbs bending the wrong way, its skin pale and slick like it had never seen the sun. The face was the same stretched mask Jenna had seen in the window, its hollow eyes reflecting the headlights like an animal's. It took one step forward, then another. Its mouth opened slowly, too wide, as though it was about to scream. Mark slammed the accelerator. The RV lurched forward, bouncing violently as it tore down the dirt road. In the side mirror, Jenna saw the figure vanish into the trees, swallowed by the darkness. They didn't stop until they reached a ranger station at dawn. Both of them were pale, shaking, unable to explain what they had seen. When the rangers checked the area later, they found no footprints, no signs of anyone being there. But Mark and Jenna never used that RV again, and sometimes, even years later, Jenna swore she could still hear it in her dreams. Knock, knock, knock. In the summer of 2019, a group of 4 friends, Tyler, Megan, Chris, and Danielle, set out on a road trip across the Pacific Northwest. They traveled in an old RV, chasing mountain views, rivers, and the thrill of camping in places few others dared to go. One afternoon, after hours of driving, they found a narrow road leading off the highway. A faded wooden sign stood at the entrance, half rotted and covered in moss. The letters were barely legible, but Chris squinted and read aloud. Pine Hollow Campground. Megan frowned. That doesn't sound familiar. Is it even on the map? It wasn't. Google showed nothing but forest. But Tyler, always the adventurous one, shrugged it off. Perfect. That means nobody else will be there. Free spot for us. The road was rough, lined with trees that seemed to close in tighter the further they went. After nearly 20 minutes of slow driving, the RV rolled into a clearing. Rows of concrete pads stretched out before them, the remains of old RV sites. Metal posts stood rusted, where electrical hookups had once been. Picnic tables were scattered, broken and half buried in weeds. The campground looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Danielle shivered. This place is creepy. Why would they just leave it? But Tyler was already parking. The sun was dipping low, and they were tired of driving. Come on, he said. It's perfect. We've got the whole place to ourselves. That night, they set up a fire pit in the middle of the cracked pavement. The flames threw long shadows across the ruined campground. The air was too still. No crickets, no owls, just the pop and hiss of burning wood. For a while, they tried to laugh it off. They told ghost stories, teased each other, and pretended the eerie silence didn't bother them. But sometime after midnight, Megan noticed something. At the far end of the campground, past the overgrown weeds and the rusted hookups, a light flickered, like the glow of another campfire. But they were the only ones there. The 4 friends froze, staring at the faint orange glow in the distance. It pulsed like firelight, then dimmed, then returned again. There's no way, Chris muttered. Nobody else came down that road. Tyler tried to laugh it off. Probably some old lantern left behind, or maybe hunters. But his voice lacked conviction. Megan shook her head. Hunters don't camp in abandoned RV parks. And why would the light go out? And come back? Danielle whispered the words they were all thinking. What if we're not alone? The group argued in hushed tones. Finally, curiosity got the better of them. They decided to walk toward the light, just to prove to themselves it was nothing. The weeds crunched under their boots as they crept past the broken tables and rusted hookups. The air grew colder, unnaturally cold, and with every step the campground seemed to stretch wider, as if the clearing had no end. Then, after what felt like forever, they reached the spot. There was no fire, no lantern, nothing. Only a blackened circle of ash on the ground, as if a fire had burned there recently. Megan crouched down. The ash was still warm, her stomach twisted. Someone was just here. Chris swung his flashlight around, the beam cutting through the trees. That's when Danielle grabbed his arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. The others went still. From somewhere deeper in the woods came the faint sound of voices, low, muted, like a crowd whispering all at once. But when Chris turned the light toward the trees, there was no one there. The whispers stopped. And then, all at once, every single flashlight flickered and died. They were plunged into complete darkness. The sudden darkness pressed in on them like a weight. Megan gasped and fumbled with her flashlight, smacking the side of it. But the beam stayed dead. "Don't move," Tyler whispered. His voice trembled, despite his attempt to sound calm. "Everyone stay close." They huddled together, breaths loud in the silence. Then the voices returned, this time closer. Whispers swirled around them, overlapping in a low, rhythmic hum. Words they couldn't understand, like a chant spoken in a language long forgotten. Chris pulled out his phone, the screen casting a dim glow over their terrified faces. "We need to get back to the RV, now." They turned, retracing their steps as quickly as they dared. But something was wrong. The broken tables, the cracked pavement, they were gone. The campground no longer looked familiar. The trail they'd taken had vanished into endless rows of weeds and trees. "It wasn't this far," Danielle said, her voice cracking. "We didn't walk this far." Then Megan screamed. Out of the darkness, a shape loomed. A tall, crooked silhouette standing between the trees. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side, arms hanging too long at its sides. The chanting stopped. Silence fell heavy. And then the figure moved, jerking forward, its body twitching with each unnatural step. Chris dropped his phone in the dirt. The light went out, plunging them back into blackness. Somewhere in the dark, Megan's voice broke through in a whisper. "It's following us." The darkness seemed alive. Every direction they turned, the whispers followed, circling them, closing in. Tyler grabbed Danielle's hand and pulled her forward. "Run! Just keep moving." They stumbled blindly through the weeds, tripping over roots, crashing into low branches. The whispers grew louder, faster, as if the unseen voices were chasing them. Suddenly, Chris's phone flickered back to life in the dirt behind them, its glow faint, but enough to cast light on the path. Tyler sprinted back, snatched it up, then froze. In the glow, he saw dozens of shapes between the trees. Figures, tall, crooked, their heads all tilted at the same eerie angle. Unmoving, watching. "Megan! Danielle! Don't look back," he shouted, his voice breaking. The group tore through the darkness, guided only by the weak light of Chris's phone. Finally, through the thicket, they saw it, the faint silver glint of their RV. Relief surged through them. They bolted for the vehicle, threw the door open, and piled inside. Tyler jammed the keys into the ignition, praying it would start. The engine roared to life. Headlights cut across the campground, and in that blinding light, the figures were gone. Not a single shape, not a single whisper. They didn't wait to question it. Tyler slammed the accelerator, and the RV tore down the narrow road, branches scraping against the sides as they fled the Pine Hollow campground. When they finally reached the highway, no one spoke. They just drove, their faces pale, their hands shaking. Later, when they tried to find the place again on the map, they couldn't. No sign of Pine Hollow campground anywhere online. But Megan would never forget what she saw as they pulled away. In the reflection of the RV's side mirror, a single figure stood at the tree line, head tilted, watching. In July of 2016, the Martin family, David, his wife Claire, and their 12-year-old son Luke, were on a summer road trip through Arizona. They loved camping, but this year they wanted something different. Instead of pitching a tent, they rented an RV, giving them the comfort of a home on wheels. On their third night, they stopped at a rest area off a deserted highway. The sun had long since set, leaving only the hum of crickets and the occasional distant rumble of an 18-wheeler. They parked their RV near the edge of the lot, where the forest loomed dark and silent. After dinner, Claire tucked Luke into bed, and soon the family was ready to sleep. The steady whir of the RV's fan lulled them into drowsiness. But sometime past midnight, a sound jolted David awake. Knock, knock. Someone was rapping on the door of their RV. He sat up, confused, heart racing. Who would be at their door at this hour? Through the small window, he saw a man standing outside. His clothes were dusty, his face hidden in shadow beneath the brim of a baseball cap. "Sorry to bother you," the man called out softly. "My car broke down a few miles back. Could I maybe rest inside until morning?" Claire stirred awake, whispering nervously. "David, don't let him in. We don't know who he is. but the man kept pleading. His voice was calm, polite. "Just a few hours. I'll be gone at sunrise, I promise. It's freezing out here." David hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to say no, but there was something in the man's tone, something desperate, almost pitiful, that made him waver. Finally, against his better judgment, David unlocked the door. The man stepped inside, and the moment he crossed the threshold, Luke stirred in his sleep, as the stranger's eyes lingered on him a little too long. The man introduced himself as Tom. He smiled faintly, but there was something unsettling about the way his eyes kept scanning the small interior of the RV. David offered him the couch near the front. "You can rest here until morning," he said firmly. "We've got an early start tomorrow." Tom nodded, lowering himself onto the cushions. He placed a small backpack at his feet, but never let go of the straps. Claire whispered to David once they were in the back bedroom, "I don't like this. He keeps looking at Luke." "Just a few hours," David assured her, though his own stomach was tight with unease. But sleep didn't come easy. The faint creak of the RV floorboards kept Claire awake. Around 2 a.m., she swore she heard movement near Luke's bunk. She slipped quietly out of bed, her bare feet cold against the linoleum. And there he was. Tom stood in the narrow hallway, staring down at Luke as the boy slept. His expression was blank, his head tilted ever so slightly, as though studying him. Claire's voice shook. "What are you doing?" Tom turned slowly, the brim of his cap casting shadows across his face. Then he smiled. "I was just making sure he was breathing." Her blood ran cold. She backed away, hurrying into the bedroom. David was already up, having heard her voice. She whispered frantically. He was watching Luke. "We need to get him out." But when David returned to the hallway, Tom was no longer standing there. The couch at the front of the RV was empty, and his backpack was gone. David's pulse quickened as he scanned the dark interior. The door was still locked from the inside. There was no way Tom could have just slipped out. He crept toward the driver's seat, checking every corner of the RV. Empty. No sign of the man, or the backpack. Claire clutched Luke close, whispering frantically, "David, I don't like this." "He's still here. I can feel it." Suddenly, a noise echoed from underneath them, a dull metallic clang. David froze. Slowly he crouched and lifted the floor hatch that led to the RV's storage compartment. The smell of dust and oil wafted up. He aimed his flashlight into the space. 2 eyes stared back. Tom was crouched in the shadows, his lips curled into a grin. He clutched the backpack tightly against his chest. David jerked back, slamming the hatch shut. His heart hammered. He's under the RV. He's hiding inside the storage. Before they could react, the entire RV rocked violently, as though someone was crawling through the undercarriage, banging against the frame. Claire screamed, pulling Luke into the back bedroom. David grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall, clutching it like a weapon. Then the RV went silent. For a long, suffocating moment, nothing moved. No banging, no footsteps, just the hum of the fan and the pounding of their hearts. Finally, David edged toward the front again, checking the hatch one more time. Slowly, carefully, he lifted it open. The storage space was empty. Tom and his backpack were gone. David locked every door and window, his hands trembling. "We're leaving, now." He jumped into the driver's seat, twisting the key. The RV roared to life. Claire clutched Luke tightly as the vehicle lurched forward, gravel crunching beneath the tires. For miles they drove through the darkness, not daring to look back. The road was empty, the silence outside pressing against the thin metal walls. But then, Claire gasped. "David, look." In the side mirror, a figure was running along the tree line, keeping pace with the RV. His movements were unnatural, jerky, as though his limbs didn't bend the way they should. It was Tom, and he was smiling. David floored the accelerator, the RV rattling as it barreled down the highway. The figure faded into the distance, swallowed by the night. When they finally reached a gas station at dawn, David pulled in, exhausted and shaking. They stumbled inside to ask the clerk if they'd seen anyone stranded nearby. The clerk frowned. "Around here? Number. No one travels that stretch of road at night. Not anymore." Claire asked why. The clerk leaned forward, voice low. "Couple of years back, a drifter killed a family out there. Pretended his car broke down, asked to sleep in their RV. When the cops finally caught him, he had a backpack full of trophies." David's blood ran cold. He glanced at Claire, then at Luke. Behind them, parked at the far edge of the lot, sat an old dented RV. Its windows were dark, and when David looked again, it was gone. Ethan and Laura had been married for 5 years, and for their anniversary, they decided to do something different. Rent an RV and take a road trip through the mountains of Montana. The first few days were perfect. Winding roads, scenic overlooks, and nights spent under skies crowded with stars. They felt free, untethered from the world. On the 4th day, their GPS suggested a shortcut. The screen displayed a thin gray line snaking through the mountains, marked as a county road. It promised to shave 2 hours off their drive. Laura hesitated. "That road doesn't even look real." "Are you sure?" Ethan grinned, tapping the wheel. "Come on, where's your sense of adventure?" "Besides, the GPS says it's fine." So they turned off the highway and onto the narrow path. At first it was manageable, just a gravel road winding between tall pines. But the deeper they went, the more unsettling it felt. Trees crowded in, blocking out the light. The road grew narrower, barely wide enough for the RV. After an hour, they realized they hadn't seen a single sign, house, or vehicle. Just endless forest. Then, as they rounded a bend, headlights flared in the rearview mirror. Another RV. Old, dented, its windows dark. It had appeared out of nowhere, following close behind. Laura stiffened. Where did they come from? No one was there a second ago. Ethan's smile faded. I don't know. They tried to convince themselves it was just another traveler, someone else lost on this back road. But as the miles dragged on, the RV never backed off. No matter how many turns they made, it stayed perfectly behind them. When Ethan finally pulled over to let it pass, the vehicle slowed too, stopping a few yards back. Its engine rumbled in the silence, but no one got out. No lights came on inside. It just sat there, watching. The silence stretched between the two RVs. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his pulse racing. "Why aren't they passing us?" Laura whispered. "I don't know," he muttered, trying to sound calm. "Maybe they're resting?" But he didn't believe his own words. Minutes ticked by. Finally, Ethan pulled back onto the road. As soon as he did, the other RV followed, its headlights burning too bright, clinging too close. Laura turned in her seat, her face pale. "They're tailgating us." On purpose, Ethan pressed the accelerator, the gravel road rattling beneath them. The trees seemed to close in tighter, the night pressing against the windshield. But no matter how fast he drove, the other RV stayed perfectly behind, never gaining, never falling back. Suddenly, the GPS chimed, recalculating. The screen flickered, then went blank. When it returned, the map showed a single, looping road, curling back on itself endlessly. No turns, no exits. Laura's breath hitched. That can't be right. Up ahead, the road curved sharply, and as their headlights swept across the bend, their stomachs dropped. Parked across the road, blocking the way forward, was another RV, identical to the one behind them. Rusting, dented, windows dark. Laura clutched Ethan's arm. "It's the same one." "How can it be in front of us, too?" Ethan slammed the brakes. The tires screamed, gravel spraying. Their RV skidded to a halt just yards away from the vehicle blocking the road. In the mirror, the one behind them idled silently. They were trapped. Ethan's hand shook on the wheel. This doesn't make sense. How can the same RV be behind us and in front of us?" Laura's voice was barely a whisper. "We have to turn around." He threw the RV into reverse, tires crunching over gravel. The headlights illuminated the road behind them. The RV that had been tailing them was gone. Only the trees remained, stretching endlessly into the dark. Laura clutched her seatbelt. It was just there. I saw it. Ethan didn't answer. He turned the wheel sharply, trying to angle past the RV blocking the road. But as their headlights swept across its side, Laura gasped. The vehicle was identical to theirs. Same make, same model, same color. Even the same dent on the rear bumper. It was their RV. Ethan's throat went dry. This is impossible. Then the lights inside the other RV flickered on. Through the windshield, they saw movement, shadows shifting, shapes crossing behind the glass. And then, for one horrifying moment, Ethan locked eyes with someone in the driver's seat. It was himself. Laura's scream cut through the silence. The figures inside the other RV were them. A perfect mirror. Ethan, Laura, even a copy of every sticker on their dashboard. The mirrored Ethan in the driver's seat lifted a hand, slowly, deliberately, and waved. Ethan slammed the gear shift into reverse, heart pounding. The tires spun in the gravel as he tried to back away, but the road behind them was no longer empty. Another RV stood there, identical again, blocking the retreat. Its headlights flared to life, blinding them in the mirrors. Laura clutched his arm, trembling. We're trapped, Ethan. We're trapped between ourselves. The RV in front revved its engine. The one behind did the same. The sound shook through the mountain air, surrounding them. Inside the forward RV, the mirrored Ethan grinned. His hand rose to the windshield, pressing flat against the glass, as if reaching toward them. Laura's breath hitched. They're going to crush us. Ethan swerved hard, yanking the wheel toward the tree line. The RV jolted violently, branches scraping against metal as they plowed off-road. Gravel turned to dirt, dirt to roots. The whole vehicle rattled, threatening to tip. Behind them, engines roared. Two pairs of headlights slashed through the forest, keeping pace no matter how wildly Ethan turned. Finally, the trees broke, opening into a narrow clearing that sloped downward. Ethan didn't hesitate. He gunned the engine, barreling downhill, praying the path would lead anywhere but back to that cursed road. The RV bounced, skidded, then burst through onto pavement. A highway. Ethan gasped, slamming the brakes. Cars whooshed past, their horns blaring. They were back among civilization. When he looked in the mirrors, there was nothing behind them. No headlights, no RVs, just the empty mountain road. Laura buried her face in her hands, sobbing with relief. But Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the GPS. It showed their location as a gray, unmarked road. No name, no history. And at the top of the screen, where it usually read route guidance, 3 words pulsed in faint red letters. No way out. In September of 2020, 3 college friends, Amy, Jordan, and Rachel, decided to take a weekend RV trip to Oregon. Classes had just resumed online, and they wanted one last escape before the semester grew heavy. They found a small campground near Crater Lake. The site was quiet, with only a handful of other RVs scattered around the clearing. A young family with 2 kids, an older couple, and a group of hikers with tents at the far end. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. At first it seemed peaceful. That night, as they cooked dinner over the fire, Jordan noticed something strange. "Did you see that?" he whispered, pointing past the tree line. For a split second, Amy thought she saw someone standing there, a figure, watching. But when Rachel swung her flashlight, the beam caught only empty trunks and drifting mist. They laughed it off. Maybe a hiker, maybe their imagination. But by midnight, unease set in. The campground was too quiet. No voices, no footsteps, not even the crackle of distant fires. Amy frowned. Where'd everybody go? They walked a slow circle around the clearing. The RVs and tents were still there, but silent. The family's chairs sat empty, their fire extinguished. The older couple's RV door hung wide open, lights off inside. Rachel shivered. Maybe they went on a night hike? But the forest loomed dark and endless. No one would take kids hiking at midnight. Then Jordan noticed something else. At the edge of the clearing, deep in the dirt, there were tracks, footprints, dozens of them, leading away from the campground, all in the same direction, like every single camper had stood up at once and walked into the woods. The three friends followed the trail of footprints to the edge of the forest. The dirt path was soft, damp, and the prints were fresh, pressed deep, as though dozens of people had walked in unison. Rachel's voice trembled. Why would they all leave together? No one had an answer. They returned to their RV, locking the doors and windows. But unease gnawed at them. The campground was still filled with belongings. Half-cooked food on grills, coolers left open, even a baby's blanket dropped near the picnic tables. It was as if everyone had simply stood up mid-meal and walked away. Around 2 a.m., Amy woke to the sound of voices. Not inside the RV, but outside, drifting faintly through the night. She crept to the window. The clearing looked empty, dark, still. But the voices grew louder, echoing from the tree line. A low, steady chant, dozens of voices blending together into a single, rhythmic hum. Her blood ran cold. She shook Jordan and Rachel awake. Listen. The three of them crouched by the window, straining to hear. The chanting rose and fell like waves, too far to make out the words, but too close to ignore. Then, without warning, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. And then, one by one, the other RVs in the campground flickered to life. Interior lights snapped on, engines rumbled, doors creaked open, but there was no one inside. Amy gasped as she realized the campers hadn't left their vehicles. Their vehicles had left them. The roar of engines shook the ground as the empty RVs began to move. One by one, their headlights blazed to life, cutting through the darkness. Amy clutched Jordan's arm. No one's driving them. The vehicles rolled forward in unison, forming a slow, circling path around the clearing. Their tires crushed the dirt and gravel, moving with eerie precision, like predators herding prey. Rachel's voice cracked. They're surrounding us. Inside their own RV, the three friends crouched low, praying the circling machines wouldn't notice. But then, the engine beneath them coughed, shuddered, and roared to life. Amy's eyes widened. I didn't touch anything. The dashboard lights flickered on, the wheel turned on its own. Their RV lurched forward, joining the circle. Panic surged. Jordan dove for the controls, twisting the key, yanking the wheel. Nothing. The RV didn't respond. It drove itself, locked into the formation. Outside, the other vehicles began to honk in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Not random noise, but deliberate. A signal. A call. Then, from the forest, the missing campers emerged. Dozens of them. Their faces blank, eyes wide and glassy. They shuffled into the clearing, moving toward the circle of RVs as though answering some silent command. Amy screamed. They're coming back. But when the first camper stepped into the glow of the headlights, Rachel saw something that froze her blood. Their skin was pale, almost gray. Their mouths hung open, and their feet didn't quite touch the ground. They weren't walking, they were being pulled. The pale figures drifted closer, their eyes fixed on the circling RVs. Each step, or rather each pull, dragged them forward, their bodies limp as though controlled by invisible strings. Inside their vehicle, Amy pounded on the dashboard. Stop! Please stop! But the RV didn't listen. It kept rolling forward, headlights glaring, horn blaring in rhythm with the others. Jordan grabbed the emergency brake. Nothing. The handle locked in place. Rachel's voice cracked. We have to get out. But as she reached for the door, the locks clicked shut on their own. The windows sealed tight. They were prisoners inside. The circle tightened. The other RVs pressed closer, their hulking frames rumbling like giants. Outside, The pale campers gathered in the center of the clearing, swaying, chanting in that same low drone Amy had heard before. And then, as if on command, every head turned toward them, the only three still resisting. The chanting grew louder. The RV shook violently, as though something inside the engine had come alive. Jordan shouted, "Hang on!" He lunged for the wheel, forcing it hard to the side. For the first time, the RV resisted. Tires screamed against the gravel as he wrenched them free from the circle. With a deafening roar, the RV shot forward, breaking through the formation. They tore across the clearing, branches whipping against the sides as they barreled blindly into the forest. Behind them, horns blared in fury, engines roared, voices howled, but they didn't look back, not until the forest spat them out onto a highway bathed in the pale glow of dawn. Breathless, they drove until the gas tank hit empty. None of them spoke. None of them could. Later, when they returned with police, the campground was gone. Not just empty, gone. No concrete pads, no fire pits, no sign it had ever existed. But Amy swore that sometimes, late at night, she still heard it. The sound of engines circling, and the low, endless chant calling her name. They weren't supposed to be out there. That's what Nora kept telling herself as the Sprinter RV bumped along a washboard road that wasn't even marked on Google, only sketched as a faint tan scar on an old paper atlas Elise had found in a thrift store. Utah's horizon was a jagged line of mesas and hoodoos, pink and rust under a merciless sky. The kind of place that swallowed sounds and made you feel small. BLM land, Elise said, half proud, half nervous, fingers drumming the dash. Free camping, baby. Nora glanced at her sister. 6 years apart, they had always been opposites. Elise the driftwood, carried by any current. Nora the anchor that kept them from floating away. The Sprinter had been Elise's dream, though. A tiny home on wheels, white cabinets, a narrow bed, solar panels clamped to the roof like beetle wings. It smelled like cedar and black coffee and sunscreen. They'd planned established campgrounds near Moab, but a storm had chewed up the highway with closures and rockfall. A ranger at a visitor center had circled a safer route in blue ink, then shrugged when Elise asked about boondocking. Plenty of legal spots, he'd said. Stick to the main tracks. Don't drive the washes. They were in a wash now. Not the deepest part, Nora told herself. Just the edge where the road paralleled its pale, compacted sand. The atlas labeled this whole cracked bowl Devil's Wash, a name that sounded like a dare. By evening, the heat loosened its grip. Shadows pooled under sage and juniper. They rolled into a wide flat, tire ruts spidering out into the emptiness. Far to the west, a pair of orange taillights blinked and vanished behind a rise. Another rig, maybe. But when they killed the engine, silence fell so completely that Nora could hear Elise swallow. Creepy, Elise murmured, then forced a laugh. But gorgeous. Look at that sky. They leveled the van with orange blocks. The sun sank like a coin, and the desert changed temperature, the rocks releasing heat, the wind sharpening. They ate canned chili in enamel bowls and watched the stars arrive. There were so many they felt heavy, as if they might tilt and pour. Somewhere out there, a coyote sang. Another answered. The sound bounced in ways Nora couldn't map to anything clean and simple like distance. The wash funneled everything. It was like listening through a trumpet whose bell might be anywhere. Tomorrow, Elise said, we'll hike that ridge. Maybe we can see the Colorado from up there. Tomorrow we find a real campground, Nora said, with people. Elise tipped her head back. People are the scariest part. They both smiled. They both meant it. At 10:41 p.m., Nora flicked off the string lights and lay down with the window by her head cracked an inch. Cool air slid across her face, carrying dust and sage and something metallic, a scent like pennies. She fell asleep to the wind combing the brush and the faint tick of the Sprinter settling on its frame. She woke to a voice, not a voice outside the van, a voice inside it, tinny and official and somehow older than the electronics it came from. BLM dispatch to Unit 217. Repeat, 217. Copy? Nora's eyes flew open. Red digits on the inverter display glowed 2:17 a.m. Her brain snagged on the coincidence and then tripped again when the voice spoke from nowhere recognizable. She sat up. The van's little CB scanner, a thrifted toy Elise kept for fun, was off. Their phones were on airplane mode. The portable NOAA weather radio was dead. Copy, another voice answered, low and calm. 2:17. Report, Reeves. Nora's scalp prickled. Reeves. The name clicked with nothing in her memory, and yet felt instantly lodged there, like grit under a contact. Flash flood watch remains in effect, dispatch said in that careful cadence of people who speak through headsets. Advise campers to clear the wash. No overnighting at mile marker 0. 10-4, Reeves said. A pause. Then, got 2 vans out here, dispatch. 1 white Sprinter, 1 box older than sin. I'll move the Sprinter, Nora hissed and snapped on the reading light. Elise blinked awake, hair a dark fan on her pillow. What? She started, and Nora raised a finger, eyes wide. A round of gentle tapping rattled the slider. 3 knuckles. Not hesitant, not aggressive, present. Ma'am? A man's voice called from outside their van. Polite, close. BLM Ranger. You folks awake? Elise slid off the mattress and padded to the front, bare feet whispering over the vinyl. Nora stayed low, heart thudding hard enough that her ribs felt like a snare. Please don't open it, Nora said, voice thin. From the other side of the slider, the man cleared his throat softly, as if to give their fear a place to sit. Flash flood watch tonight, he called. You're parked in the runout. I need you up on the shelf till dawn. Elise hovered at the curtain, 2 fingers easing it open by a sliver. Moonlight cut the scene into clean pieces. The pale skin of a cheek, the shadow of a brim, the squared shoulder with a radio strapped there like a second heart. A red dot winked on a body camera. 3 slow pulses, then a pause. Do you have ID? Nora asked, hating how formal it sounded, like she'd brought office rules to a place that didn't care. The man angled his chest toward the glass. The round badge flashed and dulled. The name bar caught a strand of light and let it go. R. Reeves. Ranger Reeves, he said, not proud, not bored, just the way you say your name to people you might have to carry later. Shelves are coned off, 50 yards north. I'll walk you. He stepped away without waiting for permission, a silhouette moving with that desert carefulness. Like every footfall is a question and the ground sometimes says no. Elise settled into the driver's seat. Starter, fuel pump, the soft throat clearing of the diesel. Little familiar sounds stacking into courage. The slider stayed latched. Nora kept the curtain cracked and watched Reeves pace out ahead of them, his hat a small moving horizon. When he raised one hand, the van's headlights caught bright orange. 2 rubber cones braced wide on a shallow scooped shelf above the wash. They hadn't been there at sunset. Nora would have sworn to it with her hand on a Bible she didn't own. Elise eased the Sprinter between the cones. Reeves lifted his palm. Stop. He made a small circle in the air. Good. Then, like a ritual, 2 knuckles tapped the hood, gentle, twice, and he stepped out of the beams, already thinning, already turning back into night. Thank you, Elise called, before fear could make her rude. The night gave her the smallest echo of his voice in return, not quite words, something like, and like, move at the same time. They killed the engine. The sudden quiet whooshed around them. For a while, only their breath and the low tick of the exhaust cooling counted time. Okay, Elise whispered, laughing on the exhale. We got lucky. Or we got something, Nora said. She didn't say what it felt like, how the shelf under them didn't feel like earth so much as decision. As if someone had pulled a chair out for them and was now standing behind it, waiting to see if they sat like good guests. The inverter display purred awake again on its own, the red digits fat and certain. 2:18 a.m. Nora clicked it off. It clicked itself back on. Wind prowled the wash. A coyote yipped, then answered itself from two directions. The desert has tricks with sound, funnels, teeth, tongues, and Nora could feel them working. "Do you think he's—" Elise started. "Real?" Nora finished, because they were always like this. Elise with the impulse, Nora with the name. Elise didn't answer. She perched at the passenger window, chin propped on her wrist, watching the cones as if they might blink. Time curled. 10 minutes or 30. The wash changed its breathing. A smell rose like a coin rubbed warm between fingers. The scent of wet stone long before the first cold slap of rain hit the roof. It came hard and immediate, as desert storms do. A drumming out of nowhere, a spray of grit rattling from the solar panels, then a deeper sound gathering itself under the first, like a choir stepping to the edge of a note. Nora rolled the side vent closed, and the new air skidded to a halt, metallic and clean and faintly terrifying. Beside her, Elise rubbed her palms together for no reason except that hands like tasks. "Do you think he's still out there?" Elise asked. Nora almost said no to be kind. What came out was honest. "I don't think still is how he works." The first voice of water reached them not as sight but as pressure, a weighty hush that made the hair on Nora's forearms lift. The wash below the shelf learned its note, low, muscular, pushing, then a tumble of higher clatter as stones began to speak to one another in their own hard language. Elise's eyes went wide. In the thin slice of moonlight, the wash materialized, brown and immediate where emptiness had been. It wasn't a river, not the way kind ones are. It was a throat clearing. It was a room that had been emptied for a dance and now held the whole town at once. They sat while it worked. The cones wobbled on their rubber feet but held. Water banged against a half-buried log, spun it, shouldered it on, dragged it under so fast it looked like a magic trick. A piece of someone's blue tarp whipped past like a flag that had forgotten which country it belonged to. In the roar, a softer sound threaded through. A pop and crackle like a radio being keyed and unkeyed. Nora bent instinctively toward it, the way you lean into a story you maybe don't want to hear. 217, a woman's voice said from nowhere and from right behind Nora's teeth. Status? Nora's mouth dried out so quickly her tongue stuck. Elise put her fingers flat on the counter without looking at them, grounding herself the way you ground a wire. Reeves's reply came threaded with a smile she could hear and not see. Sprinter moved, he said. Good. Lightning stitched the far mesa into briefly perfect detail. In that flash, for half an instant, something stood on the lip of the shelf, just beyond the cone. A long, narrow man made of darkness and brim and patience. Nora would not swear it was a person. She would not swear it wasn't. Thank you, Elise said to no one, and to the van walls and to her own insistence on living long enough to tell stories about it. The flood fell off as quickly as it had risen, like a thought forgotten mid-sentence. The wash exhaled. Water slid in silky sheets, and then in fingers and then in nothing, leaving the channel glossed and rearranged. The smell of hot rock returned anew, as if the rain had polished it. They waded through a chorus of dripping, through another set of coyotes tuning their disagreement with the weather, through a silence that felt earned. When dawn laid a gray palm across the mesas, they could see where their tires had been at midnight, pale scuffs in sand now slicked new. In the damp just below the cone on the passenger side, a single boot print, edges crisp, heel worn in an old way, the kind you don't see in stores that sell boots by the thousand. Elise squatted, hair falling forward, and held her hand above the print without quite touching it. Still cold, she whispered, like a person observing a newborn. Maybe it's just the damp, Nora offered. Maybe. Elise didn't sound convinced. They made coffee the way camp coffee is always made, with gratitude disproportionate to the quality of the beans. Steam fogged the little window for a heartbeat, and then the desert took even that. They ate granola that had absorbed one too many evenings of humidity and had the mouthfeel of cardboard softened with memory. What now? Elise asked, not a rhetorical. We find him, Nora said before she knew she would. Or the place he belongs. Elise's mouth tilted around 100 responses, chose only one. Okay. The atlas had labeled a box on the ridge, Ranger Tower, in tiny letters, as if embarrassed at its own optimism. They followed the faintest of roads up to it, the van a patient animal, gears low, tires careful. At the top, Wind stood waiting. There was no tower, only 4 blackened posts squared in the earth, each with a ring of old char around its foot like a collar. The small concrete pedestal where a radio might have sat was melted into a frozen wave. A metal placard leaned bitterly on 2 bolts and half a weld. Once white, it had flaked to a mottled gray the color of old bone. Across it, letters showed through where the world had tried to forget them and hadn't quite succeeded. Reeves Memorial Tower. The name pulled Nora's eyes into water. Elise traced the letters without touching them, the way you do at a grave when you are not certain grief is yours to claim. Memorial, Elise said, like the word might mean retired instead of gone. So he died out here, Nora said, gentle but not evasive. A long time ago. Wind worried at the edges of the placard. Somewhere far off, a truck's downshift floated up like a memory of civilization. Around the posts, footprints had baked into the dust and then into something like stone. They overlapped, paced, doubled back, then ran all at once in one direction. In the scatter of small stones, somebody had made a little cairn, 5 flat rocks balanced in a stack that dared the wind to be clumsy. Elise stood still long enough that a raven decided to flare and pass low to see if she were worth discussing. It croaked once, rudely, then let the air lift it. "Let's leave something," she said. "What?" Elise dug in the pocket of her hoodie and came up with a silver thermos dented at the shoulder. "Coffee," she said, half embarrassed. "The good stuff, not the road stuff." Nora raised an eyebrow. Elise shrugged. "He walked us out of a bad idea." They set the thermos on the melted pedestal, its metal dull beside the old gray. For a second, Nora pictured a hand she hadn't met wrapping around it, appreciative and wry. For a second, Elise looked like a kid offering a drawing to a parent who might or might not understand what it was. Wind moved, that was all. On the drive back down, the CB scanner, the thrifted toy that had been off, then on, then off again, clicked alive on its own and filled the van with the exact hum of a room you can't see. "BLM dispatch to Unit 217. Elise braked without meaning to, tires scuffing dust. 217, Reeves said, unhurried and close enough that Nora glanced into the empty aisle behind them, as if he might be sitting at the little table, boots crossed at the ankle, hat in his lap. "Do not enter the wash at mile marker 0, dispatch said. Professional voice, no nonsense. "Repeat, do not enter the wash." "Copy," Reeves said. Then, after a breath, pitched so gentle Nora wasn't sure if it was meant for the radio or for them. "If she knocks on the glass, don't open." Elise's fingers tightened on the wheel. "If who knocks?" she whispered, as if the van might answer. The wash below the shelf they were returning to whether they wanted to admit it or not, shone pale and harmless in morning light, like a mouth closed after a story. They parked exactly where they had been the night before, between the cones as if between quotation marks. The boot print by the cone had softened in the sun and then sharpened again when they weren't looking. Nora chose not to mention it. They meant to leave in daylight, of course they did, but heat pushed them into stillness, and the wind talked them into waiting, and the desert did what deserts do, stretched hours like taffy and hid the clocks. By late afternoon, cloud towers shouldered up on the horizon again, the color of old bruises. "Last night he found us," Elise said. "What if tonight we find him?" Nora looked at the atlas, at the tower ruin, at the thermos they had left on a melted stand. "Maybe he found us because he needed us to move. Maybe he needs something else," Elise said, her voice a smaller thing, almost shy. "Maybe he needs witnesses." The first stars came on early, nervous, coyotes tuned. Somewhere a dust devil walked upright for 100 yards, and then bent into brush and vanished with a sigh. The air gathered its metal edge. Nora closed the vent before she could smell pennies again. At 2:17 a.m., the inverter's digits woke of their own accord, as if a finger had pressed them. The radio found its station without help. 217, dispatch said. Reeves. Still here. Something rapped the slider glass. 3 polite touches, almost apologetic. Elise reached. Nora caught her wrist. They looked at each other the way sisters do when the world wants a decision, and neither of them wants to be the one to make it. Outside, the cones didn't move. The cairn didn't fall. The wash breathed in, and something that was not water breathed out. They did not open, and in the patient, breath-held silence that followed, the desert let them keep that choice a little longer. They left the shelf at first light, rolling carefully down the ridge, tires hissing on damp sand. The wash looked deceptively tame now, flat, pale, as if it had never spoken in a voice strong enough to lift logs and drag them like toys. Neither of them said much on the drive out. The silence between them wasn't anger. It was the weight of having shared something that maybe no one else would believe. The first sign of civilization was a gas station with a fiberglass dinosaur out front, paint peeling from sun and wind. Its long green tail arched like a question mark over the road. Coffee, Elise said, breaking the hush. Real coffee. Inside, the air smelled of bleach and fryer grease. A teenage cashier with a wispy mustache nodded as they came in. Bored in that way only small-town afternoons can teach. Behind him, a small police scanner sat on the counter, its speaker hissing softly. Nora froze. The scanner popped once, twice. Then a voice, low and official. BLM dispatch to Unit 217. Status? The cashier barely glanced at it. Old guy leaves it here sometimes, likes to listen to ranger chatter. Another voice answered, calm and steady. 217, still here. Nora's stomach dropped. Elise gripped her arm. Did you? The cashier twisted the volume down, unfazed. Always that same unit number. Been hearing it for years. Some folks say it's just interference, bouncing from another frequency. He leaned on the counter. Others say it's Reeves. He said the name casually, like it was part of the weather report. Ranger Reeves? Elise asked, trying to keep her voice light. Yeah, my granddad talked about him. Said Reeves drowned back in the 70s, trying to pull a family out of Devil's Wash. Folks around here say he never really left. The kid shrugged, chewing on a piece of gum. We don't camp out there. Not if the sky's got clouds, Nora swallowed hard. Does anyone ever see him? The kid chuckled, eyes flicking toward the window where their white Sprinter sat in the sun. Lady, people always see him, usually when they need moving. They left with coffee that tasted like burnt dirt but felt like salvation. Elise tried to laugh it off, but her hands trembled around the paper cup. That night, they booked a spot at an RV park near the highway. Neon signs buzzed over the entrance. Other campers laughed around their fires, the sound of country music bleeding from a portable speaker. For the first time in days, they should have felt safe, but Nora didn't. At 2:17 a.m., she woke to the faint hiss of their thrift store CB scanner. She had switched it off before bed, but its little green light now glowed. 217, a man's voice said, calm, familiar. She lay frozen, staring at the dark outline of the cabinets. Then another voice, this one softer, almost female, came through. Not dispatch, something else. Open the window. Nora's skin crawled. She reached across Elise to shut the scanner off. Elise stirred, eyes half open. What's wrong? Nora whispered. It's still talking. The scanner popped again. A gentle knock, knock, knock came from the driver's side window. 3 perfect taps. Elise bolted upright. Was that? Don't, Nora snapped, grabbing her wrist as she moved toward the curtain. But curiosity was stronger than fear. Elise peeled the fabric back. A face leaned in the glow of a streetlight outside. A man in uniform, badge gleaming, hat brim cutting his eyes into shadow. He lifted a hand in greeting, calm and polite. Ranger Reeves, he said through the glass, voice muffled but steady. Need you to move your rig. Not safe here. Elise's hand hovered over the lock. Nora yanked her back. No, he said. Not to open if it knocks. Her words hung heavy in the silence. Elise froze. Reeves didn't move, didn't argue, just stood there, waiting, patient as stone. Then, slowly, he tipped his hat, turned, and walked into the shadows at the edge of the RV park. They didn't see him leave. He was simply gone. The morning, they asked the park manager about the ranger. The woman, gray hair in a braid, went still. You saw Reeves, she said flatly. Nora hesitated. Elise nodded. The woman sighed, eyes clouding with something like respect and fear. Every summer, travelers say the same. He comes when the wash is restless. He warns. But if you listen too closely, if you answer the wrong voice, she let the words trail off. What happens? Nora asked. The woman leaned forward, voice low. The wash doesn't just drown people. Sometimes it takes them standing. Sometimes it takes them walking. And if it ever knocks, it's not Reeves. Silence thickened the air. You girls ought to leave, the woman finished. Find a campground east, somewhere green. Elise and Nora left without arguing. But as they drove past the edge of town, Nora glanced in the mirror. For a heartbeat, she swore she saw a white truck following them. Headlights steady, hat brim visible in the windshield. And when she blinked, the road was empty. They drove east, the mesas shrinking behind them like teeth in the mirror. Elise kept fiddling with the radio, scanning for anything, music, chatter, even static, anything but silence. It was useless. Every station dissolved into thin, restless hiss. At 2:17 p.m., the scanner in the glove box clicked alive on its own. BLM dispatch to Unit 217. Copy? Nora's throat tightened. She reached to switch it off, but Reeves's voice came steady, calm, threaded with that quiet authority. 217. Still here. Elise gripped the wheel. He's following us. Nora didn't argue. Some truths didn't need the insult of denial. They stopped that night at a turnout overlooking a canyon. A sign bolted to the railing read, "Thank you for visiting Utah public lands. Drive safe." Beyond it, the desert stretched pale and endless. They cooked noodles on the portable stove, both pretending it was just another road trip. Both pretending they weren't waiting for the hour to come around again. When they lay down in the dark, neither really slept. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the knock came. 3 perfect taps against the back window. Elise's breath hitched. Nora grabbed her hand, held it tight. Don't. The knock came again. This time softer, like fingertips brushing glass. Then a voice, low and patient, seeped through the seams of the van. "Ma'am, you're parked too close. Flood risk. Need you to move." Elise shook her head violently, whispering, "That's him." "No," Nora said. "He warned us. Reeves doesn't knock." The voice tried again, this time from the passenger side window. Calm, gentle, familiar. "Please, open up. Let me in." Nora forced herself to look. Through the glass, she saw the brim, the badge, the calm set of his jaw. Reeves, or something wearing him. He smiled faintly. "Don't you trust me by now?" Her whole body went cold. Reeves had never asked for trust. He only gave orders, clipped and certain. The thing outside waited. When they didn't answer, it bent forward and pressed its forehead against the glass. The face blurred, melted, water streaming down features until it was only a ripple. Only the wash wearing a human mask. Nora clutched Elise. "Don't look at it. Don't listen." The wash voice whispered anyway, sliding into their bones. "Step outside, just for a moment. Just one step, and you'll see." The inverter display flared crimson. 217, 217, 217. Then, over the hiss of the radio, another voice cut through, sharp as a blade. 217, do not engage Reeves, the real Reeves. Static ripped the van's speakers. The wash voice shrieked like metal tearing. The knock pounded once, twice, and then gone. Silence pressed down. The digits rolled to 218, and the radio went dead. They didn't sleep again. By sunrise, they were already back on the highway, pale and hollow-eyed. In the next town, they stopped for gas. A dusty old man in a ball cap leaned against the pump, studying their van with tired recognition. "You girls been down in Devil's Wash?" he asked. Neither answered. The man spat into the dirt. "Figures. Folks always come back different." He tapped the brim of his hat. "If Reeves moved you, thank him. If something else knocked, don't mention it again." Nora forced a shaky smile. Elise only nodded. The man walked away muttering, "Still out there, still here." Weeks later, back home, Elise recorded their story into her phone. She spoke Reeves' name once, like a prayer, like a thank you, and then stopped herself before saying it again. When she finished, the van clock glowed red in the dark. 2:17 a.m. Nora shut her eyes tight. Somewhere far away, in a desert throat that remembers every flood, a radio clicked. 2:17, still here, and the wash waited, patient. In late October of 2019, a young couple, Darren and Mia, decided to take their RV through the Sierra Nevada mountains. The air was sharp with the bite of autumn, the trees aflame in orange and gold. They were chasing solitude, somewhere quiet to unplug, to rest. As dusk fell, Darren pulled off the highway, following a small wooden sign nailed to a pine. Whisper Pines Campground. Neither of them had seen the name online, but the gravel road was well kept, winding deeper into the trees. Soon, the forest opened into a clearing lined with RVs and campers, each neatly parked, lanterns glowing warmly in the windows. "Perfect," Mia said, smiling. "It feels cozy." They found a spot at the far edge, leveled the rig, and set out chairs. A faint smell of wood smoke drifted through the crisp air. Kids' laughter floated across the lot. The sound of someone strumming a guitar rose and fell near the center fire pit. It felt alive, friendly. That night, they walked a loop around the campground. A woman in a red sweater waved at them, her smile soft in the lantern glow. An older man tipped his cap as he stoked a fire. A pair of teenagers chased each other between the rigs, their laughter thin but real. When Darren and Mia returned to their RV, Mia whispered, "I love it here. Everyone's so kind." But at 3 a.m., Mia stirred awake. The air inside the RV had gone cold, her breath a faint cloud. She sat up, listening. The campground was silent. No guitar, no laughter, no footsteps, not even the creak of branches. Through the window, she could see the lanterns still glowing in the other RVs, soft, golden light. But no shadows moved inside them. No one stirred. No one breathed. And when Darren joined her at the glass, he frowned. "Wait, do you smell that?" The air outside reeked not of wood smoke anymore, but of damp earth, freshly turned soil. Darren tried to shake it off. "It's just the forest," he muttered. "Moist earth after the rain or something." But Mia's skin prickled. There hadn't been any rain. They sat in silence, staring out at the campground. The lanterns glowed in every RV, but the light never flickered. It was steady, too steady. Finally, Mia whispered, "I'm going to check." Before Darren could stop her, she slipped into her jacket and unlatched the door. The cold night rushed in, sharp and metallic. Darren cursed under his breath and followed, flashlight in hand. The clearing stretched out around them, dozens of RVs parked in tidy rows, glowing like paper lanterns. But the air was still. No footsteps, no murmured voices. Even the crickets had gone silent. They approached the nearest camper, the one where the older man had tipped his cap earlier. The door stood slightly ajar. Darren called out, "Hello?" No answer. He pushed the door wider. The interior glowed warmly, the lantern on the counter still burning. But the space was empty. Chairs tucked in, blankets folded neatly. No sign of anyone leaving in a hurry. Maybe they went to bed, Darren whispered, though his throat had gone dry. Mia pointed at the floor. Dust had settled in a thin, unbroken sheet. No footprints, no scuff marks. It was as if no one had stepped inside for years. One by one, they checked other RVs. Each was the same. Lanterns burning, spaces neat but lifeless. The woman in the red sweater, the teenagers, the family with children, all gone. As they stepped back into the center of the clearing, Mia grabbed Darren's arm hard enough to make him flinch. "Listen," she hissed. At first, there was only the hum of their own breath. Then, faintly, beneath it all, came a sound, low, muffled, rhythmic. It was coming from the ground. Darren dropped to his knees, pressing his ear to the cold earth. His face went pale. He scrambled back, eyes wide. "What?" Mia demanded. He swallowed hard. "It's voices. Dozens of them, like they're under us." And then, from the far side of the clearing, one lantern light flickered. Just once. As if someone inside had finally moved. The flickering lantern drew their eyes like a lighthouse. Darren raised his flashlight, the beam cutting through the stillness, but it didn't reach far. The glow in the RV pulsed again, steady, then dim, then steady, like breathing. "Someone's in there," Mia whispered. They crept across the clearing, every crunch of gravel underfoot too loud, echoing as though the ground itself was listening. The smell of damp earth grew stronger, mingling now with something sharper, like rot. The RV was old, its paint peeled to gray, its windows fogged. Darren hesitated at the steps. "Hello?" he called, voice trembling. Silence. Then a scrape. Inside. The sound of a chair dragging across the floor. Mia's hand found his sleeve. "Don't." But Darren pulled the door open. The lantern burned low on a table. The air was stale, heavy. A single chair faced the back wall, its wooden legs marking faint trails in the dust. Slowly, it turned. No one sat in it. The chair moved on its own, squealing across the linoleum until it faced them. Darren's flashlight shook. "Nope, we're done. We're leaving." They stumbled back down the steps, hearts pounding. But when they turned toward their own RV, Mia froze. The lanterns in the other campers, all of them, were flickering now. On, off, in perfect rhythm. And with every pulse, the voices beneath the ground grew louder, rising, chanting. Darren gripped her wrist. "Run." They sprinted across the clearing, but the ground seemed to shift under their feet. Soft, unstable, as if something below was pushing upward. Darren yanked the RV door open and shoved Mia inside. As he climbed in after her, he risked one last glance. Shapes were rising from the soil between the campers. Pale hands, hollow faces. The people they had seen earlier. The woman in the red sweater, the teenagers, the old man. Pulling themselves out of the earth with empty eyes and soil dripping from their mouths. And every single one of them was smiling. Darren slammed the RV door shut and locked it, his breath ragged. Mia stumbled to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peek outside. The clearing was alive with movement now. Dozens of figures clawed their way out of the soil. Men, women, children. Every face one they had seen earlier, now pale and caked with dirt. Their smiles frozen. Too wide, too wrong. The lanterns in the empty campers still flickered in perfect rhythm, as though feeding the rising dead with light. The ground shuddered beneath their RV. Voices rose, layered, chanting, guttural. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything human. The earth itself seemed to hum with it. Mia grabbed Darren's arm. "We have to go." He twisted the key, and the engine roared to life. The headlights cut across the clearing, illuminating the crowd of smiling corpses. They didn't move to stop them. Instead, they simply turned, in unison, and watched. Darren threw the RV into gear, tires skidding in the gravel. The vehicle lurched forward, bouncing over ruts as they barreled toward the narrow road out. But as the forest swallowed them, Mia looked back through the rear window. The campground was gone. No lanterns, no campers, no clearing. Only a wall of trees, dense and endless, as though Whisper Pines had never existed. Her breath hitched. "Darren, it's not there." He didn't answer. His hands clamped the wheel so tightly his knuckles looked bloodless. They drove through the night until the first pale light of dawn broke the tree line. Only then did Darren finally slow, pulling to the shoulder, his chest heaving. Neither spoke. The silence was thick, broken only by the cooling tick of the engine. Then, Mia's phone buzzed. No service bars, no notifications, just a single new photo in her gallery. Hands trembling, she opened it. It was their RV, parked neatly in Whisper Pines campground, lanterns glowing in every window. And in the center of the clearing, dozens of pale figures stood smiling, waiting. Outro RV camping horror stories. The screen darkens, the faint hum of an engine fades into silence. A single lantern flickers in the background as the narrator speaks softly, almost like a warning. Out here in the wilderness, your RV feels like the only safe place between you and the darkness. But as these stories remind us, sometimes the real terror isn't waiting outside. Sometimes it's already parked beside you. If tonight's tales kept you glancing at your windows, then you've felt what campers before you have whispered about for years. But the question is, would you still dare to take that road trip? The lantern flickers once more, then dies out. Before you go, tell me, if you had to choose, would you rather face the endless desert or the haunted forest? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you've ever had a chilling camping experience yourself, share it with us. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell, because the next nightmare might be closer than you think. The outro fades to black with the faint echo of an RV door creaking shut.